So, welcome, and this is the cybersecurity awareness session for this year's Africa Digital Skills Conference. And I'm Emmanuel Mingle. I'm a cloud consultant, and I'm a lead trainer with Ghana Code Club as well. And I'm currently doing my postgraduate studies in cybersecurity so that I could be able to merge the aspects of cloud and then security. That's like cloud security. So that's my main focus area, and that's my what I'm working towards for the now. But I'm a cloud consultant and a trainer. So glad to have all of you on board, and I think we can just get started in there. Quick things to note. So there's the chat section, and then there's the QA section. So any of those you can just go ahead and then use those as well. I have the QA, I have all the windows open. So if there's any thing that you put in there, I'll be able to see that and then respond to it. I'll try as much as possible to answer the questions as we go along. So as you go along, if there are any questions, I'll just try and then answer them maybe alongside. And at the end of the session as well, I'll also give some time for anyone who has, let's say, some form of questions. Okay, so we can just go ahead then. All right, so we start off with the overview of what we would actually be looking at for today's session. And this is actually what we'll be looking at. And take note, this is actually an awareness session, not necessarily, let's say, hands-on. So I believe from the listing of speakers and then sessions that are available, there might be a possible session for those who are interested in, I think, ethical hacking. There might be a session of that on the Thursday. Yeah, I think I saw one session at that. So hopefully maybe that might be more practical, but this is to create awareness and then to get us all going. So we'll talk about cybersecurity awareness. We'll talk about two-factor authentication. We'll talk about internet security. We'll talk about phone security. We'll talk about privacy. We'll talk about passwords. And then what we should do when, let's say, you have a hack or you have a breach within your system. And so maybe you being a company, you being an individual, what can you do to ensure that at least your systems are secure? And then if your systems are broken into, what are the immediate measures that you can take for yourself? So that would be the scope of this session. And I intend that would actually be done by the top of the hour, which is by 2. And so we'll just work this out together. So let's get started. All right. I'll just go ahead with a few statistics. These statistics are mainly sourced from sometime in 2021. And so these are the things that we could just take a look at or take notice of, okay? So the first one, talking about during the COVID period, that's in 2020. So the FBI actually reported about 300% increase when it comes to cyber crimes, okay? Now, as at mid-June, that's still of 2021, it recorded about 12,377 COVID-related scams, okay? So that's like 300% increase, and then the numbers just kept increasing as it went along. Aside that, with all cybersecurity breaches, so if you have a breach anywhere, if let's say there's a breach reported in terms of, let's say, cybersecurity, the most interesting thing that you notice that there is a human in there. So there's a human, how do you call it, element, okay? And that will be about 95% of all the cases that are reported. Now, in addition to that, for every 36 devices that you have, you'd have one device out of the 36 having a high-risk app installed. Now, when we say a high-risk app, it means that an app which is what would say maybe increase the attack surface for any attacker, or it's an app that's harmful to or can cause so much harm. Okay, so it's more like, okay, so the attack surface, that would be the main thing you talk about. And then you talk about, let's say, the risk. Okay, so the app in itself would actually harm your phone. It can open up other malware. It can open up attackers to your system as well. So those are the things that you should note. So, I mean, with all the apps we see on the Play Store and all of that, there's one thing you should note when we are going along as well. We'll talk about, let's say, some forms to actually help us in line with this as we go along as well. Now, 95% of malware is delivered by email. Okay, so within the email or like using an email client or using the email service, right? You can get infected with about 94% of malware. So if let's say there are 1,000 malwares that are sent across the internet, about 94% of them could actually be delivered via email. Now, when we say malware, these are programs which are malicious. So we just say malicious software. Okay, that's just what we get together to have the malware. So about 95% of these are what we find via email. Now, with malware, you can talk about, let's say, viruses, you can talk about worms, you can talk about, I mean, different forms of that. Adware, you can talk about adware, that's adverts that you see a lot, it just pops up on your screen. You can talk about even, how do you call it, ransomware, which has become more prevalent these days. And yeah, so all of these are possibly delivered via email, okay? Now, we'll go ahead. So why is cybersecurity important? Now, if you look at the statistics that I showed at the very start, considering the rate at which cybersecurity is becoming the key concern, the rate at which more people are engaging in these things. And it's not just, let's say, for the physical side of things, or let's say with individuals, it goes beyond individuals, because I believe that for those of us on this call, for example, we may actually be in some corporations at some point in time. So how do we make sure that we, being the human factor, okay, so we talked about this particular, where was that? Yes, about the 95% of the issues that have to do with cybersecurity being because of a human error. So as humans within our companies, as humans within our countries, as humans working within our own, let's say, systems, right? How do we ensure that we are able to what, make sure that the systems are secure? Okay, so why is cybersecurity important? So we'll just go ahead with that. Now, one thing you should know, technology cannot protect us from everything. Okay, I know some people use different methods to protect their system, but you find out that at one point in time, you always have some issues popping up. And we know we talked about the 95% being the human error. And attackers would always target the human because they will definitely find out that, okay, if I get a human to become a weak link within a particular system, then it's possible. So let's say if I want to attack a company, right, I could actually just get a human being, maybe make an error or make a mistake, and then I can get into the system. Programs could have maybe made some restrictions that the attacker cannot get past. But once the human becomes the weak link, you can just go ahead from there. Now, the people issue also comes up, right? So people, okay, so the people become very important in having this done. That's why I actually wanted to go ahead with this. And then awareness, or having the awareness of like things that could cause your system to be broken into, also becomes what, a great step in reducing the risk. So if you know what is being done wrong, you can actually easily fix that when you need to. And also, if you know what's being done wrong, when you see a particular, let's say, threat or risk within your system, you can be able to report that to appropriate quarters, and then you can easily work those out as well. Okay, so cybersecurity awareness is for literally everyone and then every person. Okay, and whatever tips that you pick here is not just for, let's say, your daily lives. It's for wherever you find yourself, wherever you have to use a particular system. And we have systems or IT systems literally everywhere we find ourselves. Okay, so that should be one thing you should take note. So awareness or being aware of these things is a must for everyone. Okay, now someone will say that with all of these things that you are talking about, why would an attacker in any regard want to, let's say, focus or try to attack my system? Okay, because I'm just sitting my somewhere and I'm not really valuable. Okay, but one thing, since we are in the digital age, literally every piece of information you share out there becomes something that an attacker will be interested in. Okay, so in terms of your credit card, in terms of your medical details, in terms of even your computer system connected to the internet, that is something that the attacker is interested in. And then you can talk of your credentials, your passwords. Your email is actually literally connected to every other device that you use or every other service that you use. So if the attacker gains access to your email, for example, what's more for him than just to gain access to all your other platforms. So an attacker is always interested because these are things that he could get from the individual. So your credit card, your financial details, he can just make a copy of that and then just impersonate you to make some purchases, which in the end would actually be detrimental to you. Now, in terms of your medical data, okay, so whatever it is in terms of medical data, I mean, now because of the interconnected systems, right, you can have these data, like so much of them, and then the attacker would actually sell them maybe on the dark web or just sell them somewhere else. And in terms of the computer resources, we have the crypto mining. We talked about ransomware, advertising, and then jump point. Okay, now all of these are part of your system. So once an attacker gets into your system, it's actually a resource that the attacker is interested in. So let's say if, as a company, right, you have a cloud service or a cloud provider that you are using. Now, if the attacker gets into your system, he can actually use that for some form of crypto mining. He doesn't have to pay for that resource that you are using, because in the end, you would actually end up incurring the cost. So these are things that you should be aware of, that every single one of us is actually liable to being attacked. And then the attacker is not just having some specific people that they are looking for. Okay. Now, how would you protect yourself? I mean, we found out that the attacker is always interested in whatever information that we have or whatever information that we are sharing. So how do we now protect ourselves to make sure that all these things, or the attacker cannot get access to whatever details that that are being lost, or whatever details that we are sharing? How do we protect those things? So those are the things that we'll look at now. So first thing that we'll look at is in terms of updates. Okay, so I mean, we always see updates on our system, but I don't know how many of us are very keen on updating our system. Maybe we would say that because of how do you call it? Because of some data or the cost of data, I cannot be updating my system always. But one thing you should know is that updates become very critical when it comes to information security. So at every point in time, you have to keep your system up to date. Okay, so the first point here talks about what was secure yesterday may not be secure today. Now, the reason why this comes to mind, okay, now there's a term in cybersecurity called zero-day attacks or zero-day vulnerability. Okay, now what these means, or what this talks about, is that there are some vulnerabilities that we know, or there are some security threats that we are aware of, but then there are some other threats that are available that we do not know of. So let's say an attacker, based on his research, or based on let's say he trying to find some attack surface or some place that he could work with, he finds a vulnerability. Now, that vulnerability is not known to your vendor, or is not known to, let's say, your security provider. Okay, so it's something that just the attacker knows. So it means that the attacker can take advantage of that. Now, if the attacker keeps taking advantage of that, it means that the only way that you can be protected from that is if that particular vulnerability is disclosed. Okay, so at the point when the attacker discovers that, it's a zero-day attack because no one actually knows about that. And when your vendor actually gets to know about that, I mean, from yesterday, it means that they have to make sure that in the morning or in the next few minutes, they are able to provide a solution or a patch for that particular threat, okay, or zero-day attack. Okay, now if that particular attack is now patched, or they provide a patch for that, and you do not update your system, then it means that you actually left behind. So the attacker, even though the security breach or the security threat that's available, or that was discovered by the attacker, has been patched by your system, because system provider, because you do not now go ahead to update your system, it means that you are still living in the past, and the attacker can still take advantage of your system. Okay, so it can be within your operating system, it can be within your browsers, it can be within whichever platform that you are using. They can still go ahead and then attack these particular systems. Okay, so that should be one thing that you take note of. So I mean, updates literally need to be done every other day. So you can even schedule updates to take place every other day, so that at least you are kept updated for whichever system that you are using. Okay, and a key thing to note also, I mean, vulnerabilities are discovered literally every day. I mean, if you go on the internet, there are vulnerabilities coming up every other day. Okay, and these vulnerabilities are things that attackers are looking out for. And because if they find these vulnerabilities, they can easily take advantage of your system and then take from whatever data or details that you have. So it's very important that you update your systems to make sure that at any point in time, these are things which are taken care of. Now, another thing that you should take note of, okay, when it comes to this thing is that you don't just maybe build out your system and then you forget about it. So let's say you have a Windows system, you run the installation today, and then you're like, okay, I'm good for how many years I'll be using this piece. No, you have to keep updating your system. You have to keep getting new updates, because that is where you are able to now protect yourself in terms of security. Okay, right. The next thing we look at is keeping your system up to date. So what are the things that you keep up to date? You talk of your operating system. Now, I mean, if I see anyone probably using Windows 7, the one thing that will come to mind is why is this person using this particular system? Because Windows 7 is actually done for, in the sense that Microsoft does not support that again. Now, if there's any vulnerability that's discovered in Windows 7 in the year 2022, Microsoft would not work or will not spend time to patch that particular vulnerability. What they do is that they would actually just go ahead. And if there's a vulnerability with, let's say, Windows 11 or Windows 10, then Microsoft will provide a patch for that. But if you're using Windows 7, that is not something they would actually do. So they stopped providing, let's say, support for that as far back as 2020. So it means that if you're using a system like Windows 7 or Windows XP or Windows 2000, it means that you are highly at risk, okay, because no one is actually taking care of you, or nobody's keeping your security in mind. And you yourself, you are not keeping your security in mind, okay? So you have to make sure that you have an up-to-date system, and then you keep updating it. So you can't use Windows 7 because it's actually not being supported again. Now, for the other operating systems, like let's say Mac OS or Linux, they also have support lives. I know for Linux, for example, when you come to Ubuntu, they have the long-term support, and then they have the short-term. So the short-term, for example, they support the system for about 10 months, and then that's it. And then for the long-term, for example, they can have support for the system up to 5 years. Okay, so within that 5 years, if you are using that particular system, so let's say if you are using 22.04, Ubuntu 22.04, it would actually be running with support for up to about 2020. That will be 2027. Okay, you can still use that particular system because they will keep pushing up updates for that. But if you are using a system like, let's say, from 2014, that's like 14.04 of that particular system. Even though there was that 5 year support, it means that as at the time of 2022, there will not be any support for that. So for whichever operating system you are using, being it Apple, being it Linux, you have to make sure that you are protecting that. Now, in addition to that, we talk about the antivirus. So your antivirus has to be updated always. Now, we talk about definition. So I hope we can all see this here where it talks about the definition. Now, the definitions is what helps out for antiviruses to be able to detect whichever virus or malware is on your system. Okay, so based on the dictionary of definitions that they have, they are able to detect that, okay, this particular program is susceptible to, or it is actually a virus or it's a malware. Now, there are various viruses which keep coming up. So someone would have developed a virus today, another one would have developed another one. So you need to keep your definitions or your antivirus system always up to date. Okay, so you have to keep that up to date. And one thing you should note is that it's ideal for you to actually have, let's say, a paid for service. Okay, that actually ensures that you get top notch in terms of whatever provision that's made for that particular antivirus. So if you can afford, okay, it will be good to get a paid for version of the antivirus. That will also help you through all of that. Okay. All right. And please, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and then use the Q&A session, and then you can share that on the chat as well. Okay. As we go along, answer those as and when they come to, and then possibly at the end of the session as well. Great. Right. So one thing also, aside the operating system and aside, let's say, your browser, one thing you should note is aside the operating system and then your antivirus, okay, and then maybe other applications. One key thing you have to note is your browser. Okay, now for most of us, we actually are working with our browser. And what our browser does is that it gives us the option to now get to the internet. All right. So one thing we should not forget about is our browser, okay, because the browser actually becomes the gateway to the internet. Now, if it's the gateway to the internet, it means that it's also a gateway for things on the internet to actually get to our systems or our computers. So one key thing you should take note of is that you have to actually update your internet browsers as frequently as possible, because within them also there could be some vulnerabilities at one point or the other. So if you don't actually take note of these updates for them, it means that you are still susceptible to some attacks, okay, from the internet. And then your mobile devices as well. You'd realize that for some of the devices, they also have, let's say, a support life or a support term. So let's say for about 5 years, you can still get updates for your Android OS or your Android system. And then after a while, you don't get updates for that again. So if you are very much conscious about your security, once, let's say, there's the end of life for that particular phone in terms of security updates, you definitely, it will be good to actually change that. Like what you have the up-to-date system or the up-to-date operating system for that particular phone. All right. And for people who are more into, let's say, connected homes or smart homes, you should also take note of these things, because these are very much of these are systems that attackers are very much interested in. So if you don't secure them as well, it means that what it becomes difficult. And let me just give an example. Let's say for a smart home. Now, a smart home, let's say a router or something, these things mostly have like some form of password. And most people tend to use just the basic password. So let's say when they brought in the device, it had admin as the username and then admin as the password. And then we just leave it at that. We are not interested in changing that password. Now, if anyone gets a hold of the device, you'd notice that maybe at the back, they might have the password written there, and then they can just easily log in. But it will be ideal that you change all of these things to just keep yourself secure at one point or the other. Okay. I think there's some question here. So Esther Wagura was asking about scanning of computer files, helping to detect malware attacks. I think, yes. So if you actually scan your system very often, right, it helps detect these attacks. So some attacks would actually run in the background. Some of them would actually run, let's say, on the foreground. Now, in the foreground, it means that it's it's very easy to detect. So, for example, let's say if your antivirus will just pick that up easily because it's on the foreground. Now, for those that do not run in the foreground, they're just working behind some processes. You cannot detect them except you actually go ahead and then run an extensive scan. So sometimes, if you feel that your system is running slow or your system is not working, right? It's not working very well. Okay, you can just go ahead and then you just go ahead and then make sure that what you have that done also. So like if you find out that your system is not working, it's not working as it should, you could just scan to make sure that you are safe. And then if aside that, you could also maybe set out some specific time, let's say weekly or something, just to, I mean, keep yourself at peace at some point inside. Yeah, so it's very good to actually run the scans as much as possible, literally every other time when you are able to do that. Okay. All right. So thank you, Esther, for that question as well. And for the rest of us, if you have any questions, you can still go ahead and then ask those ones also. Now, let's talk about the last bit when it comes to protecting yourself. And that has to do with backups. Okay, now I'm sure we are more than conversant when it comes to backups. And so backups with backups, right? The good thing is that, I mean, if you create a backup, okay, you actually save. So if anything happens to your system, you can actually revert to that particular backup. So I mean, you can back up to a cloud storage service, you can back up to another external drive. And that ensures that even if your system actually fails, you can actually go ahead and then use a different system altogether. And another thing is that if you are running these backups, right, make sure that these backups are not connected to your system all the time. Now, let's say if a virus gets onto your machine and then your backup device is also connected to your machine, literally the whole time, it means that that particular attack will affect your system and then to affect your backup also. So if your system crashes, now the backup will not be able to actually help you restore those ones. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so you don't have to necessarily connect the backup at all times. So maybe you are done with your backup, you can just unplug that, or you can just disconnect that from whichever provider that you are using, and then you'll be good to go. And one last thing you should do is that you should test your backup. So let's say you have to make sure that at all points you actually test your backup, like from time to time. This ensures that maybe you would have thought that you are done with your backup, but the backup did not complete. And then let's say once you are now ready and you want to use that backup, you realize that, wow, what I've been doing these past days or weeks did not amount to anything. So you testing all the time, it gives you that peace of mind, and then it ensures that what you're actually secure all the time. So when there's some bit of issue that your system has to go down or your system information is lost, you can just go ahead and then resort to your backup. Okay, so that's just one thing you should take note of. All right, and then these are just some statistics about people and then how they go about their backups. So about 35% of like sample people actually have never backed up their information before, and then some people actually do that yearly. Some people also do that monthly, and then some people do that daily. I mean, for most of us, I think we have some bit of external drive that we actually back up our details on. And then on our phones, we have these storage backups as well, which become very good. So like every time you actually take a picture or you store some information, automatically you get that information backed up. So these are very important to actually secure or safeguard your data in terms of, let's say, remediation. Okay, so if you face an attack at some point, you can just fall back on that and then use that. Okay, so that's for the last bit of how you can protect yourself. So we'll go on to the next point where we talk about passwords. Okay, now passwords are literally for everyone. I'm not sure there's anyone here who would say that they don't use a password at some point in time. Now, if it's a password for just your email, definitely at some point you'd connect that to your other accounts. You connect that to, let's say, your work account or your phone or something. So let's talk about now how to manage these passwords. Okay. Now, first thing you should notice that when you're actually keeping a password, you have to make sure that what it's in a secure location. Now, a secure location means that no one can actually be able to access that. So if you're in the office, for example, or you're in the house, you can't go around sticking, let's say, your password to your PC. You paste that on a sticky note and then you just paste that on your computer. Now, anyone who chances on your computer can easily be able to access it. Okay, so that becomes an issue. Now, another thing is if you are storing it even on your computer, you can't store it in clear text. So let's say if you store it, you have about 1,000 passwords, or let's say 25 passwords that you for different accounts, and you want to store it on your PC, which is not really advisable. But with something like that, you need to have a master password that will make sure that if anyone gets access to that particular file, they are not able to use that. Okay. And then you can utilize a password manager. So a password manager that actually stores the password for you. So if you want to visit a particular account, what it does is that it actually now stores the password for you, and then it automatically allows you to enter those passwords. Okay, so I mean, with one strong password, it can also generate the other passwords for you. It encrypts the passwords for your system, and I've talked about it also filling out the details for you. So on my system, for example, I have the LastPass, and then anytime I have to create a new account, it can automatically generate the password for me, maybe based on some parameters. And then anytime I want to now sign in again, I can use that to autofill that. And then you can sync those passwords between various devices. Okay. Now, interesting thing is that um, I think a few months ago, LastPass, this password manager actually had an attack on their system. The good thing is that I think there was not a lot of people who are affected. Okay, but these are things that you should take note of. So the system that's supposed to protect people's passwords also got some form of attack at one point in time, and then these are things that do happen. Okay, so as much as you'd go ahead to use the password manager, you should also be very much of thoughtful as to how you protect yourself in one way or the other. Okay. Now, so with tips, I mean, these are things that we should know of. Okay, so make sure that what these are things that people cannot easily guess about you. So in terms of your birthdays and all of those should not be things that you'd actually put in there. Now, the second point, separate passwords for every account. I know that's very difficult for people. I would say it's probably difficult for me myself, but it's ideal to do that because if an attacker gets one password and then he knows that you use that same password for different accounts or you have different accounts, they could actually try those passwords against those accounts. And if it's the same password, it means that you actually get some form of what issue coming to that. Okay. Now, in addition to that, make sure that your passwords are things that are what auto-generated. Okay. So using the password manager, that becomes very possible because it auto generates that for you. Some strong password. Okay, so I mean there are things that go into a strong password in terms of the length, in terms of characters that are in there, in terms of how it's not part of like let's say a dictionary. It's not a word that people can easily get. Okay, so these are things you should probably take note of. Now, let's go ahead. I think we have quite a few minutes left. I'd want to give some time for questions and answers. So uh, let's just speed up. But if you have any questions, right, you can put that ahead into the chat, okay, and then I'll answer them in, let's say, the last 5 minutes of the session. Okay. Now, these are things you should actually take note of when you want to do a password, right? Ideally, right, your password should not just be a word. It should be like a passphrase. So a passphrase is like more or less like a sentence for the password. So instead of just saying my password is just password, I could say my password is password. So password as compared to my password is password. Those are two different things. It's almost like a phrase, right? And that's something that's easily helpful. And not just the passphrase, like let's say a sentence, but you add the components of like the length, you add the component of in terms of characters, okay, special characters in there so that it cannot be easily guessed. Okay, so that becomes some of the helpful things that you could actually go by. So even with the passphrase, you can easily remember that, and then you can implement some form of characters in there. You can implement some variations in there to also help you. So numbers, whichever one those are, that would be very ideal. Okay. Now, right. I don't know. This is what I found for like, let's say top 20 passwords when you come to 2022. And I'm not sure any of us would actually have this as our password though, but I mean, you get to have people actually use this as their password. And the interesting thing is that I talked about the IoT devices or devices that we make purchase of. Now, mostly because they want to make it easier for people to remember, they might put in, let's say, a password as 12345 6 because in that way it will be easier for the users to remember. But the moment you keep this password as the password of your device, then that becomes an issue because then anyone can easily guess that. Okay. And this passwords become very easy for attackers to actually break into because they are plain straightforward. So I just have to type 12345 6 on my keyboard and then I have your password. That's very easy. Okay. So you have to be very particular about whichever password that you are using. Right. Now, the next thing you should take note of is that two-factor authentication. Okay. Now, passwords are not enough. Even when it comes to two-factor authentication, they are not enough. Okay. So I was actually reading about a couple of attacks that people use still to actually break into the two-factor authentication. Let me talk about two-factor authentication and then we'll go ahead. Now, the two-factor authentication actually adds a layer of security to whichever password that you are using. So aside your password, right, there is another authentication factor. So if you type in your password, you're authenticating against a particular system. So let's say your PC or your website or whichever one. Now, the two-factor authentication ensures that what, aside the password, you are required to enter a second form of authentication. Now, in cybersecurity terms, you talk about, let's say it could be something that's on you or something that you know or something that you have. So it could be like a key card. Okay, so maybe you're going to an office, you enter in the password, and then you have to present, let's say, your key card at some point. Or you could just scan your iris or something, I mean, or your fingerprint. These are all like components that you can authenticate on your system against. Now, when it comes to, let's say, our computers, you can use like the SMS, you can use a phone call, I mean, you can use an email. These are things that we actually get to see. But it's important that you actually have a two-factor authentication. So with your emails, with your social media accounts, with your work accounts and all of that, you have to make sure that what these are done. And then if you are, let's say, an administrator, you are managing, let's say, the infrastructure of your system or of your workplace, it's ideal that you can enforce these rules within your system. So let's say on Office 365, I mean, let's say if you're using a mobile device manager, for example, you can actually enforce that to make sure that every time someone signs into the account, they actually require or they are required to actually enter an SMS, a code that's sent to their SMS or their email, right? Another thing you could use is Authenticator app. So we have Google Authenticator, we have Authy, we have Microsoft Authenticator as well. And then all of these, what you actually get is that what they send you some form of code, okay, which you have to enter, and the code keeps changing. So you can see on the right side. So let's say for your Facebook account, right, you have to now enter this code. Now, when this I don't know how to describe this, but the moon-like shape here, it would actually keep changing or to keep moving. And after 30 seconds or something, this code will now change. Okay, so at that point, if anyone even has access to your system, they can't necessarily get the new code or like the way it keeps changing. It actually protects you in one way or the other. Okay, that adds to your security. Okay, so that could be something you could also consider. So for each of us, I could just suggest that you could actually look out for the Google Authenticator and then, I mean, activate the multi-factor authentication or the two-factor authentication on your system so that you not just use the password, but you use the code given either from your email or the Authenticator app, and that actually goes ahead to protect you in one way or the other. All right. Okay. Now, let's talk briefly about links. Okay, so working with links. Now, just a click, right, could put you at risk. Okay, so whichever link that you actually click on, it could actually put you at risk. So we see links in our emails, our password, wherever we work, let's say Teams platform, like where we are working with our colleagues, right? Now you have to verify, first of all. So am I actually expecting this particular link? Okay, so let's say a friend sends you a link to purchase something. Were you expecting that link from that person? Okay. And then you have to be very careful about that. Now, another thing is that you hover on the link. Now, if I hover on any link at all, wherever it might be, you should be able to see the website in question, okay, which you can help you just verify to make sure that, okay, this is the link that the person sent, and then this is what it means, that this was what the person was talking about. So let's say the link mentions Facebook, but when you hover over it, it could actually spell out something else, or it could point to a different link altogether. Okay. Now, another thing is to use your intuition. So sniff test, where you just check, right? Is this a site that I can easily recognize? Is this a site that easily relatable, easily relating to something that you can easily relate to? Okay, whichever link that you click, make sure that what it actually is something that you are familiar with. Okay, that means that you should be skeptical. So whichever link you are receiving, make sure that what it's not something that would be, let's say, detrimental to you. So we see links with people saying, okay, win an iPhone somewhere. I mean, why would someone want to give me an iPhone at some point? Why would someone want to give me a laptop? I mean, just go through all of these things and then think through that to make sure that what you are receiving something that's genuine. Now, finally, if these tests are very much of in tune or they check out, you can just go ahead and then click on that link. Okay. Now, still with that, if you are still in doubt, just make sure that you can go ahead and then throw that away. Now, we are well aware of scams, and these are things that we see. Okay, so red flags. I mean, there are many things that you should take note of in there. Talk about the words which are used in there. So why would someone send you, let's say, some strange wording or some email address or some fishy email or some fishy things that they put in there? Just be aware of all of these things. And then if someone sends you an email, right, just check. So maybe your friend sends you an email. Is it your friend's email that you can see? Is it the name of your friend? Is it the name of that particular company? Is that the email of that particular company? Is it an email that you're expecting? Is it like, are they using the correct signature, the email signature? I mean, the domain that they are using for that particular email, are these things that you should be looking out for? These are all things that you should look at. And it applies to emails as well. I mean, we get to see a lot of emails coming through each of the time. I mean, with the mobile money fraud, for example. So you just have to be very much particular about it. Now, you may not. One thing I noticed is that when we receive these emails, text messages, right, for these mobile money frauds, it's easy for you to identify that it's a fraud, okay? Because you actually look at the text. I mean, it feels odd. It feels off because maybe the sender is very different in terms of the amount and all of those things. So these are things we are able to apply automatically when we see those emails. And if we take close attention to that, we can be able to detect some of these things in our emails as well, like let's say general emails that we receive or other text messages as well, and then apply that to our daily lives as well. Now we talked about the links. Okay, so just make sure to hover around that. And then if you are not certain about any link, just forget about that. Now, if you receive a shortened link, okay, you can actually copy that link and then place that within a particular website that would, how do you call it? That would unshorten it for you or make sure that whichever link it is, you are able to now get that. There are quite a number of those there. So let's say you received an invite for this particular conference, right? I mean, we use the short link for that, bab.ly. So maybe you just see that you're not sure of it. So you can just go ahead and then paste it within these sites and then make sure that you have exactly what you are looking for. Okay. All right. Yes, so hover all the time. Okay, so within your emails, within your SMS on social media, just make sure that you have the right option available to you. Okay. All right. Now let's talk a bit about emails attacks. Okay. Now we talked about this earlier in terms of what the emails serving as the main point from which people actually deliver some form of attacks or malware attacks. Okay, so about 92% of that. And then one thing that happens is that mostly these are done through the attachment. So let's say someone attaches a file and then you are not sure of that. That can easily introduce virus or a malware into your system. So whenever you see any of these, make sure that it's someone you trust who is sending that to you. Okay. And then if the person is someone you trust, were you expecting an attachment? I mean, based on your recent communication, was the person supposed to send you an attachment or something? And is it normal for the person to actually send you that attachment? So these are things that you could actually keep in mind to just be secure. Okay. Now, right. So other email scams, okay, there are quite a number of those as well. So some can be non-technical. Okay, so it can be just plain simple requesting some information from you, and then maybe you have to respond by clicking on a particular link or doing something. I mean, just be very much particular about that, and then be aware of phishing as well. Okay, so let's say you are within a company and you'd have a message from your CEO asking you to maybe send them your email or their email or password. I mean, something weird like that. I mean, why would they be asking you for that? So in such a case like that, you could actually reach out to whoever is asking you for these sensitive details just to confirm. Let's say maybe you are the assistant, the administrative assistant. You can just reach out to them and ask, I mean, I saw this email. Is it something that you wanted me to do? That sort of protects you in one way or the other. So what are they asking for? Let's say wire transfers, the credentials and whatever. Just take note of that. And then in terms of the sense of agency, okay, now if you receive an email that has some form of agency attached to it, especially from within your organization, and you realize that, I mean, there are mobile phones there. So if someone like that actually needs those details, the ideal will be for them to probably use the mobile phone. So within the emails, if you see things like this, it should actually put you in a sense of what consciousness, or you should be very much cautious about however you deal with that. Okay. All right. Yes. So one thing people actually do is to work with the recent events. So let's say um, COVID just passed. I mean, someone is actually using that to actually scam people. Or maybe there's uh, a season coming, let's say Christmas or something, and then all of these things. So take note of all of these forms of things that scammers actually want to use. I mean, we are very much conversant with that, and then we should be good to go. Now, okay, so we'll just go ahead for that. Yeah, so phone scams, I think we are pretty much comfortable with that. Since we don't have so much time, I'll probably just skip that. But I mean, just be cautious whenever you receive these things. How do the information that you're asking for actually play out, and how do they go to be? So still with a sense of agency, just very much particular about that. What you're asking, are they very clear about it? Are they from the place they say they are from? How would, let's say, a person from MTN address you? How would someone from, let's say, your company address you? Those are things that you should actually be looking forward to. Okay. All right. Because I mean, with all of these things, they attach a sense of professionalism to whatever communication that they are giving. So is that something that you are receiving? How are they able to answer to your questions? I mean, just inquire and then just make sure that what you're actually in a safe place, and then you are speaking with the right people. All right. Okay. Now, for general tips and then privacies. Okay. So if you find, let's say, for example, a drive which is not sourced from yourself, I mean, be very much particular about putting that within your system. So you see a pen drive somewhere, don't just go ahead and then install or just connect that to your PC. And then if you actually run some programs, okay, if you actually use these systems, whatever it is, they could actually introduce some virus into your system as well. All right. Now, in addition to that, encryption. So if you are visiting a site, make sure that whatever site you are visiting is encrypted. So for most encrypted sites, you'd see from here the HTTPS with the lock on there. Now the lock tells you that what the site you are visiting is secure. And this becomes very important when you are visiting like sensitive sites. So let's say you are logging into your bank account, or you are logging into your company account. These are things that you should be very particular about. And ideally, you shouldn't connect to, let's say, a public network like a public Wi-Fi when you are accessing these sensitive information. Okay, so just be very much of careful about all of these things. Okay, okay, and yes, so don't install anything you are not comfortable with. Work with trusted websites. Public Wi-Fi's are not good, especially when you are dealing with sensitive information and all of that. And then, as we talked about initially, now attackers are very much concerned about your data. Okay, so just be cautious that you don't actually give out your data to them. Okay, these are things that you're after. So make sure you protect them in the best way you can. And I mean, are you oversharing those particular details? I mean, what things are you sharing on the internet? These also might not seem like security threats, but in the end, they actually become very much of detrimental to you as you go along. And then, right, this will be probably the last thing that we'll talk about. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Yes. So, what happens if you've actually realized that you've been attacked or you've been a victim of an attack, right? Now, the cybersecurity authority, okay, that's within the Ghana space, okay, they actually suggest these things. So they have their website, their email here, so report at csa.gov.gh. You can actually send them an email at some point. They have an application that you can actually call. They have an SMS line. They have an online form. all of these things are things that you could actually reach out to. Now, aside that, we have the police division. The Ghana police, they have a cybercrime unit, okay, which actually focuses on cybercrime. Now, they actually talk about they not just deal in terms of like cybercrime, but let's say general crimes that actually involve some form of, let's say, digital technologies or um, digital tools. Okay, so these are the people that you could actually reach out to. Okay, so you could just go ahead to the csa.gov/report. Now, you notice that once I actually highlighted this link here, the link actually shows at the very bottom of my page. Okay, now this is what we're talking about when it comes to verifying the link. So it's actually the correct link that I'm wanting to click on. Okay, if I had showed something else, I just have to be wary of that. Okay, and then the Ghana Police Service, they are cybercrime units as well. So you have their website here. Okay, so if at any point in time you've been infected or let's say some ransomware or some form of attack, I mean, you can just reach out to them and then you can put this in mind as well. You can just unplug your PC, especially if it's some attack over the internet. Okay, that makes sure that what they can't actually proceed. Or if it's some attack that's actively affecting your system, because your power is off, your internet is plugged out, you don't actually have that propagate at some point. And then you can contact the IT support and then just keep track of what happened within that period as well to be able to share with these organizations when they need that. So let's say in terms of the timelines, in terms of let's say any discrepancies you find, and then whatever things that you were doing. Okay, so these are things that you should take note of. And then yeah, so aside that, I mean, when in doubt, just ask a question, your IT department, your IT provider. This slide was actually provided by TwoFactor Security. It's one of the security agencies that actually help with security training. Okay, so you can contact them as well. And then just keep learning in terms of various security trends that are happening. So I was talking about the two-factor authentication. So in recent times, right, people are actually finding ways to actually evade the two-factor authentication or to still breach those two-factor authentication. So more reading actually make sure that what you are abreast with these things, and then you are able to work it out to make sure that what at any point in time you can actually have that done or you can be secure for yourself. All right. All right. So that actually brings me to the end of the presentation. I know I sort of rushed through the end of that, but I wanted us to be in time. But I'll just give room for those of us who have some questions, right? You could just go ahead and then ask that. For some reason, because it's a webinar style session, we can't have you unmute your mic and then ask your question. So you can just go ahead and then type that within the chat. So you can type that within the chat, or you can go ahead and then use the QA session at the bottom of the screen, and then I'll go ahead and then answer those as well. Okay. Okay, so if there's any question, please feel free. I mean, general, in terms of everything like that, you can just go ahead and then ask those as well. Okay, I don't think anyone is wanting to ask a question. Okay, that means that we are well clear of that. That's good. That's good. All right. So I just want to say thank you all for joining the session. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, so this is more like an awareness session. Okay, so these are practical steps that we could actually take note of going along. There is a more, how do you call it? I'll say a more detailed session, okay, by a colleague later on Thursday, introduction to certified ethical hacking. So if you want to actually go ahead and then dive into some form of cybersecurity education, you can just go ahead and then join that session as well. It would actually be at 2 p.m. if I'm right. Yeah, I think that would be 2 p.m. on the Thursday. All right. So you could also join with that. And you can reach out to me. I would actually put my email, my LinkedIn in the chat. Okay, you could just reach out. And when you reach out, just send a message as well. Let me know probably where we met, and then we could pick up from there. All right, great. Okay. So I think Deborah is actually asking a question. So as a beginner in cybersecurity, what things should I hold on to progress in this field? Okay. Um, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's not really in the scope of what we have here, but I'll just see if I could give some bit of a response to that. So, I mean, cybersecurity is very broad, very huge, very, very huge. The reason why I actually attribute that to being very huge is that it actually covers literally every every field of computer science. So it covers networking, it covers something to do with databases, it covers everything to do with application development. I mean, with all of these fields, data science, AI, you have some form of what cybersecurity in there or cybersecurity component in there. So you have to be, as a cybersecurity expert, I mean, you have to be abreast with all of these things, not extensively though. I mean, for the basic point, and then identify what you easily relate with. So you could be someone who easily relates with, let's say, databases. So it means that as starting someone who is starting off for cybersecurity, then you can focus more on what database security because that is what you easily identify with. Okay, so it's very broad, okay, but just know what you are into or what you are interested in. I mean, you could experiment for a number of times just to identify that. And once you lay hold on that, you could also go ahead and then focus on that and then never stop learning. Like you just keep at it. It's very important to keep learning, keep reading, and then just open yourself up to like whatever information that's available to you. All right. And then with that, you can just keep flying as you go along. All right. I hope that sort of answers your question to uh, some form, Deborah. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. I think Lassine also has a question: how to protect our email from hacking. All right. I think I spoke in terms of that. So there are various ways that the attacker would actually go ahead to, what do you say, to attack your system. I mean, via email. Okay, so uh, one thing you could actually look at, or one thing you could consider, will be the very fact that your passwords have to be very strong. So, in the first place, if your password is strong, it means that the attacker cannot actually get into your email. Okay, so your password has to be strong. You could actually have a two-factor authentication in addition to your password for whichever email client that you're using. Now, if you are using the email client on your phone or your laptop, make sure to have that updated at all points in time. Okay, so let's say you are using the Outlook client on your PC. Make sure you have that updated to make sure that what no attacker can actually exploit something that will be used against you. And then the third thing is to take note of scams. Okay, so if you receive emails, make sure that what they are from the right people who say they are from. Okay, so if it's from your manager, make sure it's from your manager. If it's from your bank, make sure that what it's from your bank. Because if you don't take note of that, you would have some viruses introduced onto your system. And then let's say you could also expose yourself to some data, some of your data being stolen. So let's say you receive an email and you think it's from your bank, and then you end up opening that particular link that they attach. You could end up giving your bank account details to a third party. Okay, so just keep these things in mind. I mean, there are various forms that the attacker could actually go ahead, or there's an attachment. You download that onto your system and then it just takes over your system. Okay, so just make sure that what you are very conscious when it comes to securing your system and then going ahead with that. Okay, so that's just one thing. I hope that sort of answers your question, Vasim.